Hello and welcome to the final 2018 Don's Trust election candidate interview. I'm Nick Draper, but more importantly, I'm sat opposite Tim Hillyer right now. Tim, first things we have to ask, as we've asked everyone, is basically, what is your occupation at the time being?
I'm a finance manager for a medium-sized charity.
And whereabouts is that? Is that based locally, or is that up in London, or whereabouts is that?
I've got a superb office overlooking the Thames at Temple. So it's a job I want to hold on to and stay there for as long as I possibly can.
Cool. And now, how long have you been a Wimbledon fan?
My first game was in the mid-60s. We used to go occasionally with my grandfather, father, brother and extended family. And that was on an occasional basis through the 70s. We started getting season tickets in the mid-70s, just at the right time to see Alan Batford's team take us into the Football League.
Can I ask where this current side might rank in all the teams you've seen down the years?
In terms of the individual components, player for player, certainly the best collection of players we've ever had. Unfortunately, the team is yet to prove itself more than the sum of its parts.
Fair enough. You're watching games then at Kingsmeadow at the minute. You've got a season ticket?
Yes, we used to come to watch Wimbledon reserve games and the occasional Kingstonian game. So even before the time when the terrace at the front, or the enclosure as it was called at the time, at the front of the Paul Strank stand, before that was extended to become the front 3 or 4 rows of seating. So we knew that row D and block H was the place to be. And that's proven by the fact that you have to be carried out in a box to give up your seat in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what? I'd forgotten about the little enclosure, the way Kingstonian used to have it. I think when I first time I came down to the ground, it was there, and yeah, it was quite a nice little feel to it actually back then. Albeit basic in other areas, maybe.
Well, it's difficult to think back as to how Kingstonian ever thought that this was a ground that was going to be fit for league football, but they came very close to that. Unfortunately, they focused their efforts on winning the FA Trophy. I was at Wembley for one of those, one of the worst games ever seen at Wembley against Forest Green Rovers.
Yeah, I remember that was the turn of the millennium, wasn't it, around that time? Yeah, Steve Cuppier, I think, perhaps rings the bell. But anyway, we're here to talk about elections, 2018 Don's Trust elections. You're standing for re-election this year after a 2-year term. Reading through your manifesto, you said over the past 2 years you've been sitting on the strategy and organisation and the operations groups. Now, I've got to be honest, this isn't technically, I suppose, business speak in a sense, but it's a little bit vague for someone like me who's not really working in those sorts of areas. Can you sort of expand and explain what those groups actually do?
Well, the background of this is the business, if you like, of the Don's Trust, the day-to-day management of memberships, which is, of course, vital, and we're blessed to have a superb membership secretary. He does need help, though, in developing the system to integrate with the CRM. Looking forward, we need to look at the constitution, but things had to be put in place first, such as knowing the certainty of moving to the new stadium. But one of the next steps that our members will see in the coming 12 to 18 months will be that we need to put in place further protection to ensure that what we have built doesn't get taken away from us.
Now, I mentioned there those words, strategy, operations, organisation, all those sorts of things. Do you think when we start talking about these in these sort of terms, we're struggling at the minute with engaging with sort of younger members. Do you think they sometimes hear these things and read these things and immediately almost zone out from it? And do you think there's a way we can alleviate those sorts of problems without sort of having to distance ourselves from telling the younger members exactly what the Don's Trust is about?
Very much so. So it's 3 or 4 years since we engaged with the members to find out what their view of strategy really was, so that we could understand it and then redirect our energies to ensure that we delivered on that. And one of the issues in the past has been whether the members really wanted to go back to Wimbledon or whether they were content to stay in Kingston. Those sort of big decisions only come about through consultation. Moving into the new stadium, that consultation will be at a different level perhaps, looking at fan experience, whether that's catering and bars, whether it's how the new stadium is used day to day, because if we want it truly to be a community stadium, it has to be used 7 days a week and not just 1 day a fortnight.
In terms of those younger members we're talking about, and we're talking about Don's Trust meetings where they usually attended and the age range is sort of my age upwards. Do you think there's a way we can get people to those meetings, or do you think it's more a case of or the Dons Trust Board getting out to the members in other methods? I
think that process has started, and perhaps we've come across some of the solutions by accident. So at an SGM, we didn't have a clear idea of what the agenda was, and we wanted to talk to members perhaps in smaller groups. So we had some breakout sessions of about 30 minutes each on various topics, and that was much more successful than it must be very daunting for someone who's not experienced to stand in front of 100, 150 of their fellow members to make a point, whereas in a group of 15 to 20, people will come forward with ideas that they might not think will be well received, but that's often where the best ideas come from. Now, we developed that with the recent informal meeting at a pub in Wimbledon, and again that was very successful. There was the opportunity for a lot of one-on-one engagement between prospective board members and membership of the Trust, and we have already started to have our working groups on match days. There's a bit of dispute about whether that's best before the game or after the game, but we have identified times and locations within the stadium where we can go ahead with those meetings, and you'll see a lot more of those in the coming months.
Now, in regards to the new stadium, something else that you referenced in your manifesto, you said the Dons Trust Board scrutinises and takes decisions as required. Can you elaborate on this and sort of what decisions have fallen under your remit as opposed to the Football Club Board's remit?
Well, most of the Dons Trust Board work is in oversight, so the Football Club Board, and with regard to the stadium in particular, it's Eric's remit, is to bring to the board the latest developments and bring along an expert or two when necessary. So I've met and spoken to Dan Norris, who's done a huge amount of work on the planning side and the financial side, including some absolutely brilliant breakthroughs that the impact of which will be seen in the years to come. And Andrew, of course, who's worked on the development side. Most recently, of course, we had to make a decision to move away from Scots and to find a new developer, because Eric and his colleagues were unhappy with the direction that negotiation was going. And Eric doesn't make those decisions. He brings those decisions to the Dons Trust Board for us to discuss and then give him guidance and a decision.
And that's an interesting one. We know about the contractors, and that was a late change and things like that. What questions did you ask of Eric in that instance then? If he comes to you and says, look, this is the issue, how do you then, specifically will you be discussing with him at that point?
On the one hand, being oversight, you don't want to go into too much detail, because that could take up hours and hours and just duplicate work that has already been done. Having said that, we do need to look at certain specifics and understand why we have reached the point that we have. And so there were things like the height of a particular wall that would be very expensive at its fullest extent, but as it turned out, it wasn't necessary. And again, I don't want to compromise where we had got to with Scots, because they were our chosen contractor at the time. But there are other instances whereby when we looked at it, and when Eric looked at certain things, that the expenditure either wasn't as essential as was first thought, or where significant cost savings could be made.
Something else you mentioned in your manifesto that we're looking through was external relationships with other supporters groups and what have you. How much of a priority do you think this should be? Some people might argue that really at this time, especially it's a challenging period for the football club right now, that more of our effort should be focused purely internally as opposed to looking outside of that.
Yes, I hear that. I am the one who's probably most involved elsewhere with my role on the National Council of the Football Supporters Federation, to which I was elected earlier this summer. I have stood for the board of the new organisation, which is due to be formed on the 22nd of November, which is a joint venture between the Football Supporters Federation and Supporters Direct. It is vital, I believe, that we are not only seen as the best example of supporter-owned club, but that we give advice when requested, but that we also learn from examples elsewhere, and there are plenty of good work done at other clubs. And there are campaigns in which we are also interested and issues that we need to deal with. So a particularly recent one was at Haringey where flares were thrown onto the pitch. I am very strongly against pyro of any type, just on safety grounds alone, plus the impact that can be brought upon the individuals who perhaps don't realise what they're letting themselves in for if they were to be identified and sent to court. One particular item that would be of most interest, I think, to AFC Wimbledon supporters is the Stand Up for Choice campaign that the Football Supporters Federation have been working on. I was involved in that to the extent that I was at the hearing when the Sports Minister at the time, Tracy Crouch, announced the inquiry and review of evidence, which we'll be reporting hopefully before Christmas, as to whether the government will be recommended to take it further and to look further at not only rail seating but options for bringing back terracing at various levels of the Football League and possibly even the Premier League. What we have at the moment is a situation where rules are being circumvented with so-called singing areas and so forth. And the issue is that supporters are falling out amongst themselves because some people want to stand and others want to sit. And they're falling out with the stewards, some of whom are overzealous in getting people to sit down, and others are quite lenient. So we need decisions to be made, and hopefully that will occur in time so that we can adapt the designs for the Plough Lane Stadium.
There's a couple of things there, actually. You referenced the fan-owned element of our club, which I want to touch on and link with something else. But just on the stadium issue, well, actually, they sort of tie together because safe standing, which people are looking at things like that, and terracing is still, of course, allowed League One, League Two levels, but not above that. Link that with an aspiration of AFC Wimbledon to be in the Championship, also an aspiration to remain fan-owned. Do you think the current setup, the way the club's arranged, would still be viable at that higher level? Or do you think that perhaps, if we're going up that higher, certain disconnect that some fans are feeling at the moment between the football club and the fans will just grow wider?
I think this works two ways. I think absolutely certain that the club and the trust need to work harder to engage, whether that's through social media, whether it's online, whether it's responding better to questions and so forth. But it works the other way, that it shouldn't necessarily be that you only get to hear about things if you're a volunteer or one of a chosen few, as some people seem to think there is. It should be that you come along and engage with people. Most of those who are raising these points, by the way, walk past the Don's Trust kiosk every home match, and yet they go home and ask these questions online when they had the opportunity to ask them on the match day, and I would encourage everyone to do that. Eric is very visible on a match day. We all know where Ivor is at hospitality, and he will come out and respond to questions. So I think there is an opportunity on both sides for better engagement.
And you think that will still be the way we're set up as a fan-owned and trust-run and all that still would be fine as a model for a club that wants to move up the leagues, be in the Championship? Or do you think we might have to look or consider how this might change the higher we go in the pyramid?
Well, it remains to be seen as to how far we can progress. I think the stadium size has a large amount to do with that, because football, as is seen in a lot of academic research, the level at which you play is really dependent on the money that you can generate, and that is dependent upon the number of fans you can get into your stadium and the amount of sponsorship and media exposure that you can generate. There are the obvious example being Barcelona of a situation where fans get once every couple of years to vote for a new president, and that is nearly always governed by who has the greatest financial resources. So I would look to Germany, and the 50% plus one model does work at some clubs, where the clubs interact with their supporters and listen to what they want to do. My particular club in Germany is St. Pauli, where strangely the board of directors are private businessmen, but they do react very well and interact with their supporters. Their stadium now at the Millantor is absolutely spectacular, and match day experience is to be seen to be believed.
Okay, we did have one question from Matt Cooper, but it kind of linked in with the idea of connecting between fans and club. I think we've sort of covered that base, really. So I think it's probably time moving on to a little, well, I'll finish really. Some more laid-back questions. First thing I have to say is that what we've done for all our candidates this year is we've made an anagram of all your names. And yours, we've had some very unfortunate ones, we've had some very apt ones. Yours is one of the stranger ones, Hermit Lily. Do you know anyone called Lily? Do you know any hermits?
I have been to some monasteries and where monks put themselves into solitude, but I wouldn't have wished to have done that for more than a touristic visit.
That is so random. But anyway, Hermit Lily. And the other part is 89 seconds, so basically we put 89 seconds on the clock in reference to the fact we were formed in 1889 as a football club, and it's a very quick list of either or questions. It's just the first answer that comes into your head. So I'm just going to keep an eye on the time just as it disappears in front of me, and we shall make a start. So first of all, brown sauce or red sauce?
Red sauce, tomato sauce.
Strictly Come Dancing or X Factor?
X Factor.
Motor racing or greyhound racing?
Very much motor racing.
Pie or panini?
Definitely pie.
What sort of pie?
Steak and kidney.
Good answer. £25 a year to be a Don's Trust member is too expensive. Yes or no?
No. It's a great deal.
Would you rather spend an hour listening to a crying baby or a dripping tap?
A dripping tap.
I thought that as well, actually, and you're the first person that's gone for that. Everyone else picked crying baby. Tom Hanks or Leonardo DiCaprio?
Tom Hanks, very versatile.
Live without television or without your phone?
Live without television.
Would you rather live without your knees or your elbows?
Knees, I think.
Should self-service checkouts be banned?
Yes.
Is interpretive dance a lost art? Yes or no?
No.
Spice Girls, better with Victoria or without?
Better with, but because they always turned her mic off anyway.
Relegation, disaster or a chance to rebuild?
It's not a disaster. It's definitely a chance to rebuild, but not that I wish for us to have to endure that.
And finally, as we reach the end of time, when you make a cup of tea, do you put the bag in the mug first and then the water, or do you put the milk in first?
I heat the mug first, and then I put the tea bag into boiling water.
And then the milk goes in last?
I don't have milk.
No milk. Okay, fair enough. Well, that's fine. That's fine. As long as there's no milk in the cup before the bag or the water goes in, we're all right.
If I make a cup of tea for anyone else, there is scientific fact as to why the tea bag should go in first.
See, we hear conflicting evidence on this. I was spoken to at length on Friday at Haringey about how the milk has to go in first, but
that is seriously wrong.
There you go. You've heard it. That is the definitive voice on that issue. Tim, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Or speak to me, I should say, this evening. And I just wish you all the best for the forthcoming election.
Thank you for the opportunity.